Nice.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third program in our four-part AI series for the fall. There's the list of the series. We started in September with a program on content licensing. Last month, we looked at AI and editorial, keeping with the theme of how AI is being used by authors and publishers. We're now going to look today at AI workflows and how they are being built and executed both by authors and by publishers. Next month, I hope you'll join us when we're going to focus on the author's side of the equation, looking at how three different authors are rethinking the work that they're doing as authors using artificial intelligence. Now, we also had a series back in May, which is part of this same group of seminars. We looked at, can AI be detected in writing, which remains a hot button topic, and also AI in translation. We took a first look at that. Both of those webinars are available on YouTube at that URL. We'll send out these slides with the references and various points on the slides at the end of this event. The video for the event will be available in a week. Here we are, title of our session today. We'll have Q&A at the end, and we encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A section, not in the chat section. It'll be easier for us to work with it if you post your questions on that section of the Zoom call. Now, we have something new this session because we have an author with us, a speaker today, Pam Baker, and her new book, Using AI, just happens to be about AI. And it's the best book I've seen yet on generative AI. Excellent book. Pam's going to talk about her process in creating the book and the intersection with her publisher using the AI tools. And I wanted to point out to people who are here today that this grew out of some work that the Book Industry Study Group has been doing in looking at AI within the publishing industry. The AI working group is a portion of the workflow committee at Book Industry Study Group, and everyone's encouraged to get in touch with Brooke or with Brian at the group and talk to them about getting more involved with workflow and AI from a publishing holistic perspective. This is the inevitable plug that I have to put in for my new book on AI that came out in very late July and is available at the URL, also on all the usual retail outlets. And my website is The Future Publishing, where I blog on this topic. Now, I was thinking the other day, this is a little bit like the land claims statements that you sometimes see on webinars or live events. I feel that it's necessary when we talk about AI to always contextualize it around the fact that this is not just Happy Valley, that there are a ton of concerns that people have, both specific to publishing and far more broadly around the use of artificial intelligence. And this is the listing I often will show of all of the different types of concerns, and there's more than that. And to pretend, that these don't exist is not something we want to do. And we want to be realistic about that, but at the same time, that's not what our webinar is about today. But I always say to people, by all means, there's lots of reasons to judge AI harshly, and there's also reasons to abstain. And so, there's nothing wrong with choosing to abstain. We think there's lots of opportunities here, but there's also lots of risks, and those are not to be diminished. Now, with workflows today, what we want to do is explore the question of what is a workflow, what is a publishing, and is as intriguing is what is an author's workflow, and where do these things potentially intersect. So we want to go from a conventional sense of what is a publishing workflow through to then what is an AI-enabled publishing workflow. And the theme here, is it just a set of tools that we use, at different sort of episodically, you might say, within the workflow, or is there a unified approach that we can see around AI? And intriguingly, and something that we won't be able to fully explore today, do the AI tools allow us to redefine publishing workflows? I think they do. I think it's going to be a new era for how authors and publishers work as both sides begin to adopt the tools, and Pam will be exploring some of that with us today. In the workflow conceptualization, Book Industry Study Group has a good free 20-page brochure booklet on understanding workflows from a publishing-centric perspective. And one illustration from that report is a very high-level look. And this is not uncommon when people are talking about workflows to just have this kind of top-level acquisitions, development, review and editing, production. And then, as anyone who works in the conceptualization of workflow, you then go that next step down and you look to the right-hand side of the slide and you see that the complexity creeps in so quickly. And the other thing about workflows is, while you can conceptualize them broadly and make a kind of that kind of top-level visualization, every workflow is different. Every organization has a different workflow. And so that's a conundrum as you try to find a way to document and standardize workflows within an organization. So with AI tools, the roll your own opportunity is illustrated here. As for instance, is not by any means a comprehensive list of tools, but it's some that you could take a look at. There's actually 3 tools now that I think of it, but here's 2 of them that look at whether or not we can AI enable the acquisitions process, the manuscript evaluation process. Book Scout AI and Storywise are those 2 tools. Editorial, there's a slew of tools that we explored last month's event, but EditGPT and of course Grammarly and built-in tools with the software you're using today. Design, Adobe Firefly, DALL-E are some of the AI-enabled design tools, and marketing, some specialized tools like Shimmer and LitX, which is just beginning to reach the market with their product coming out of Germany. Authors have many more tools at their disposal. I maintain the startup database, and God, we've got over 200 tools that authors can access that are AI enabled. So there's lots of ways to roll your own, as it were. If you're looking to kind of one-stop vendors who have again, a holistic view of workflow, there's a bunch that you see on the list. Most of them have not yet, taken their conventional approach to workflow and built it out with AI enablement. At the end of the list, you see there, but by chance, 2 vendors who begin with the letter V, both use AI at Veristage and Vertisales. So if you're looking for vendors who work across the workflow, those are 2. Katai, that Barbara will talk about, one of our speakers today, is another one that is moving in that direction. And we'll look at the ways in which they're AI enabling their tools and workflows. So our speakers today, Diem Bloom is the Director of Publishing at Johns Hopkins University Press, doing Hopkins Press books. They'll be our first speaker. Barbara Ruehling has a fascinating service and process called book sprints that we'll be exploring. A whole book in 5 days. It can be done. And Pam Baker will take us down the author perspective on workflow. She's the author of Generative AI for Dummies. It's fascinating, and she'll talk about this. She controlled, initiated, and managed a whole workflow from her side right through to the Wiley AI team. It was what would we call it, a pilot project of sorts, but I think a very successful one. And Pam will document the steps in which she built a unique workflow around a book about AI. So let's turn it over to Diem Bloom. And Diem, can you talk about the kinds of books that you publish and the workflow that you've instituted or built over the last several years?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I can't get my video to work. I work for Johns Hopkins University Press. We are the oldest university press in the US, so we are actually close to celebrating 150 years in operation. And we're actually 4 interconnected business units. So I work for the books division. So we produce scholarly, professional, and trade books in science and the humanities. We also have a journals division that does that publishes peer-reviewed academic journals, whether they are our own or we do them as a service for other organizations. We also have a fulfillment service, and we also have Project Muse. So as an organization, then, beyond publishing our own content, we collaborate with and provide services to the broader university press community and other mission-based organizations. So my particular area is publishing operations. So my team takes care of the copy editing, design, and production part of the workflow. So turning raw content manuscripts into published products. So for us, we're very focused on managing costs, managing schedules, managing quality, communication, expectations. If you ask a production person what they do all day, they're going to tell you that they are solving problems all day, which includes preventing problems and trying to minimize the impact when things go awry.
That's great. That's great. Go
So
ahead. Go ahead.
so, you know, we're always looking for things. We're always looking out for trends and patterns. We're always looking out for how to reliably and sustainably sort of do more with less, do it consistently, on a scalable function, because we have 120 to 150 books, new books a year. So workflows obviously are very important to us in terms of being able to reliably produce high quality academic material. And
Good.
so, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
But sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I got to push you on
Yeah.
to talking about AI.
Yes.
Yeah,
So to
Ethan and
talk
I have
about
been talking
AI.
about it for over a year, and I know
Yeah.
that you're a leader in the adoption of AI and have been an early adopter. So talk about how that's beginning to inform your workflow.
Yeah. So yeah, we and a lot of this has to do with our culture. You know, we as an organization, we're encouraged to really engage with new tools and technologies, including AI, in support of our mission. So we actually have our own internal AI working group. And the reason I brought up those 4 business units before is we cover quite a wide spectrum of the publishing industry with those 4 business units. And so our AI working group has representatives from all of those divisions, from all the different departments, different roles and responsibilities, and different job levels, managers, senior executives, and entry-level assistants. And all of that coming together, we are trying to build our AI literacy across the entire organization at all levels, and doing that through hands-on training and also really encouraging hands-on experimentation. For example, we do have a walled garden with for ChatGPT. We have a paid service, and my entire publishing operations department, I think except for maybe 1 or 2 people, have access to that, have volunteered to have access to that, so that they can really test it out and look at how they can improve their day-to-day work with using AI. So in terms of the larger, how we are implementing it on a larger basis, I think the 2 areas we have focused on are maybe the 2 areas that are new for us. So alternative text
Mhm.
is one area that we have been focusing on, and then also AI narrated audiobooks. So those are the 2 things that we are incorporating into our regular workflow. For example, with the alt text, we are incorporating it into our pre-editing workflow, where we're styling and tagging the documents and cataloging the art, and then trying to generate the first draft of alt text using AI from that. So then that flows into our copy editing process and our review process.
Jim, just for people in the audience who
Mhm.
don't know about alt text and its importance, just give us a quick background on that.
So alt text, I know a lot of publishers have been doing it for a very long time, but we're all under the same deadline now for those of us who've been dragging our feet. June 2025. We need to have alt text in our ebooks in order to sell them in the EU. So for us, it's a matter of how do we create alt text for these new projects coming up? So the workflow I was describing to you is how we're looking to do that. But as the oldest university press in the US, we've got a massive backlist. And so we need to figure out how to do that as well. And again, in the same way that we're looking to AI as a technology to help support us with our front list, we will also be looking to see how we can use that for our backlist. And honestly, a lot of it is we don't know how it's going to be done because we're learning about AI just like many people out there. We're testing it out, as a as sort of a production team, we often rely on our vendors or external organizations to sort of help us with the technology piece and scalability. So it's very interesting to be in the position of we've got the same tool everyone else does. So how about we figure out what we need from it and what we can do with it, with our own team and knowing our own needs, as opposed to sort of waiting for the product that comes out that is a one size fits all that may not necessarily fit us.
Yes.
So
When you say you have the same tool, I'm assuming that means ChatGPT, but talk about the tools that you're using.
um, the we're using ChatGPT, the paid version, primarily is where like my team is focused on, but with the sort of a large internal AI working group, someone has every other GPT covered in some way or another. So we share resources, we meet up to go over use cases, to speculate on possible use cases that we wouldn't possibly have known about, again, from the books or journals or distribution or online perspective. Um, Again, with the idea of like, especially on the production piece of it, if there's anything that we're doing that is repetitive or anything that we're doing that we can pull together rules and guidelines to teach someone else to do for us, let's put some of that into how do we get AI to do that for us. Because I always sort of just like to say, we have so much work to do, um, that there's um, AI will just help us get to some of those other things that we've been putting on the back burner.
It's not about replacing anyone, it's about getting more work done.
Yes, exactly. And again, with academic publishing, it's getting more work done, high quality work with very limited resources.
That makes sense. And you mentioned audiobooks. What tools are you using and what's the context for AI generated audiobooks?
We're currently using Google's software for, and these are AI narrated audiobooks. Um, and these are backlist books where we have we have audio rights, but we're not able to exercise them financially or work with another vendor who, again, financially saw it as a viable option, to make a traditional audiobook from. So we're testing it out in using the software. We have pre-selected voices. The problem with that is like Google just discontinued my favorite voice on there. So Mike is gone and now I'm gonna have to replace him with someone else. But we do this, again, these are books that otherwise would not exist in audio, which means that these are books that otherwise would not be accessible to that
Yes.
audience. So we are working with the authors, making sure that they're aware of what's happening. We give them the option if they want to listen to it. You have some authors who are like, just go ahead, we trust you. And we have some authors who it's like producing a book. They'll want to hear it. They'll send you the corrections. You work on it. We'll go through multiple rounds. But again, it's to make something available that we have not been able to make available, for a very long time.
We're going to
Um,
look at that some more when we're doing some sessions in the new year. That'll be one
yeah,
of the topics is AI and audio. But let's go to our second speaker. In Berlin, we have Barbara Ruehling. Tell us about book sprints.
Hi, Thad. Thank you. Yeah, Booksprints is a tiny company based in New Zealand and with a team all around the world. Team of facilitators, illustrators, editors, and HTML book designers. And Booksprints is also the name of our method that we use to guide a group of expert authors. Some of them don't consider themselves authors. Through a 5-day process from an empty page to a publishable book. So it's written, edited, illustrated, layouted, typeset. We're not a publisher. It's then handed over to whatever publishing avenue they choose, and we can help with that. But yeah, it's a lot of the times it's academic publishers. We work also with governments or large NGOs that often have their own publishing channels in-house. We work with tech companies, so they may publish these as manuals, not for sale, but to go with the tech. So we just make sure that it's handed over in a way needed.
So you've got
We know that.
authors as part of the process, and you're doing the whole thing in 5 days. How is that possible?
Well, we started 15 years ago, so not 150. We're missing that digit, but we're still very proud of the 15 years, and we've done this for hundreds of books. Starting with sort of the tools of the internet, like what can we do working online, collaborating in real time. So the workflow that you showed earlier, that where it's like step handing over, going back. How can we do that all kind of synchronously in one environment at the same time with 5 to 15 authors? So we always work with groups who write one book together. And then the editors, illustrators, and book designers also working at the same time in the same environment. Adam Hyde, who came up with this method, started Booksprints 15 years ago. And he went on to, on the one hand, create open source publishing tools, which is now housed in Coco Foundation. And then Adam and I work on sort of the facilitation of the human workflow in Booksprints. So we're sort of imagining this, as, like I said, like a synchronous workflow in real time. And we're doing this on the one hand with the help of the online tool, but also with a strong method and a strong facilitation. So the facilitator is in the middle, sort of the spider in the middle of the spider web, making sure that this creative chaos comes together.
It seems, given that you're building a process with an ultimate kind of efficiency, when I thought about this webinar today, I thought, well, who could be more sort of suited to looking at AI and thinking about how that could enhance the workflow than the work that Barbara's doing? So where is AI beginning to factor into Booksprints?
Yeah, I think we were very excited when it all started. I mean, when ChatGPT sort of exploded that's not where it started, but when it became, mainstream. We were very excited looking into how can this enhance our workflows. Also very skeptical at the same time. And we're still in very many testing phases, testing out where is it actually bringing efficiency and improving quality, and where is it actually rabbit holes that guide people off track and cost more time. But yeah, enthusiastically testing. So on the one hand, the Coco Foundation is building AI into their book production platform, Ketty. And on the other hand, at Booksprints, we're experimenting with real groups that are working on real books and real use cases, and looking like, how do these experts actually interact? What are their use cases? What do they find useful? What do we find useful? What we're working on at the moment is, on the one hand, creating a knowledge base in Ketty. So authors, experts can upload any existing written material of their organizations or of themselves that we can then query as part of the book writing process. An editor as part of that environment, of the book writing environment, also an AI-enhanced book design and page layout. And I know they're also looking into alt text and other tools, but that's not the case at the moment yet.
And talk about the software that Adam's been developing and where that fits into your workflow.
Yeah, so that's Ketty. It was just renamed Ketty. There's Kotahi that you mentioned earlier. That's for a lot of like scholarly journal publishing, and then Ketty is more for monographs and other types of books. And we're working very closely together. We're sort of always the first guinea pig to try everything out, and yeah, iterating on the different versions of it. And what we've been testing is with real authors, exactly towards your question, like a unified system, or does it make more sense to have a toolbox? We see people actually being often very reluctant still to use the tools. I think early on we thought like, oh, this is going to explode and it's going to get out of hand, and we have to have really strong facilitation skills to make sure that we don't produce, thousands of pages on the click of a button and then have to weed through that. We see in those like professional levels that we work with, international organizations, tech companies, etc., academics, that there's more reluctance than sort of enthusiasm so far. I mean, this is our small data set, obviously. And we also see that this sort of one unified workflow is very promising, but it's also often not the reality of people working in, with different tools across the landscape. I think Diem said it really well, like everyone in the team's using different things and you can exchange, and people also already established their little workflows. So whenever you try to come up with the one system to rule them all, people escape that. But I think there's value in both of it. So we're playing around with that.
I was intrigued that in our conversation with Diem that so much of this is not the magic, but the more conventional side of educating people, letting them play with the tools, supporting them in their journey to become familiar with the tools. It sounds like that's very similar on your side of the street.
Yeah, that's very much the case. And we also make sure that, we inform people on ethical and transparent use, and always having humans in the loop. So there's of course, we all know there's the danger of hallucinations and all the other the list that you had in the beginning, and making sure everything is always sort of like this, one step AI, one step human, one step AI, one step human. And more looking also very similar to what Liam said, what are like the repetitive, unloved tasks or tasks that we even can't get done. So for example, in the 5-day books, we don't do alt text. I mean, there's like the option to do it, but that almost never happens. No. Glossary indexing, also writing between 5 to 15 authors. We have some methods to make their language more coherent and more consistent, so it really comes together in one book, and we have amazing copy editors who help with that. But there's a lot of opportunities there. No, there's certain things like headings, consistency across so many different authors and across so many thousands of words, that we see a lot of potential.
Indexing is a really fascinating one. I'm doing a webinar in December with the Association of Indexers. And so I've been studying, it seems like a natural for ChatGPT, and yet there's not much out there yet. So we'll see where indexing applies. Let's go to our third speaker, Pam Baker, and your book that I'm really enjoying, so again, generative AI. We've got 5 copies to give away today. We're going to randomly draw from the people in attendance today, and we're going to put them in envelopes, padded envelopes, and actually mail them in a very analog sort of fashion. They said we could give out ebooks, and I said, no, paper books. We need 5 copies of the paper books. So those are going to be on the way to 5 attendees today. So Pam, tell us about the process and also about working with Wiley. It was something that you were doing as an author, but you managed to bring in the publisher, which I think is fascinating.
It was a fascinating project, and I've been a published author for many years now. I've got some work with Cengage before they left, and with O'Reilly and Wiley, and I had written a book called Decision Intelligence for Dummies for Wiley previously, and that is all about taking the science and psychology of decision making, the way humans use it, and converting that into AI rules and helping that decision process. So, for example, if you apply for a credit card online, this is how one form of AI, it's not generative AI, but it's an AI or an advanced analytics program, then makes the decision on whether to grant you that credit card or not in a pretty instant time frame. So I had already worked with Wiley on that book, and they knew my history and working with AI and data analytics, big data and automation tools and a variety of things. So I had a strong background in that area. And so Wiley called me, and like every other publisher, they said, we're trying to figure out this AI thing. And what we're envisioning is we would like to pull the entire workflow together. And so we want to start with an author. We would like you to do it if you're interested, given your background in both being a published author and in AI specifically. And so I said, I jumped right on that. I'm like, yeah, that's, really my thing. Yeah, let's do that.
And you bring 20 years of experience with AI as well, as we were talking about.
Yeah. And so generative AI let me back up and say I had already written the first edition of ChatGPT for Dummies too. That we didn't explore AI in the publishing workflow. That was just get a small book out quick because ChatGPT had just hit the market. And Wiley wanted a book out there to explain what it was and how it works. And by the way, I just wrapped up writing the second edition of ChatGPT for Dummies last week. So that'll be out in a couple of months. And it is more on prompting and workflows, whereas the first edition was what it is and how it technically works. So anyway, I had already written Decision Intelligence for Dummies and ChatGPT for Dummies for Wiley when Wiley called and asked about this pilot project. And I'll apologize, I'm coming down with a little bit of a cold. So apologize for my voice.
It's that season.
They were good. But anyway, so Wiley had several ideas of how they would like the workflow to work with AI that they wanted me to explore with them, collaboration with them. But they also wanted me to lead the project from the author's perspective in order to see how it actually worked on the creative end, if it was overly restrictive or problematic in any way and this type of thing. So we had two main goals: to explore Wiley's broader ideas in the workflows and my ideas of what an author needs to actually work with it. And so we came at the pilot project both ways. The book, Generative AI for Dummies, does talk about a lot of the strategies that I used and a lot of things we did, plus a lot more strategies and AI tools. So I covered specifically how to generate long-form content like books, academic and scientific literature, short content, audio, video, how to blend these things together, like use a ChatGPT to write a script or lyrics for a song, and then use something like Loudly to create the music, and something like, I don't know, either a Dream Machine or Synthesia to do the video work, and merge those together. And the book also covers content engineering, or what I like to call content design. So strategies like output stitching, multiple AI use, AI chaining. I know these are a lot of terms that probably everybody's going, what? But the book explains that in detail.
That's what delighted me about the book, because I thought, oh, for dummies, and it's like, no, it's in the for dummies format, but my gosh, you do go into depth that I think our audience would really appreciate. This isn't just a sort of average person books. People in publishing will really pull from this book and get a lot of value.
Yeah, that was the hope, to make it understandable and accessible and easy to wrap your mind around complex topics, but to give you all the tools and the strategies to creatively create something and then produce it. So that entire workflow that we're talking about today. So, it was like a three-pronged pilot. It came off really well. It's being received really well. And I'm glad to see that. And I'm doing some similar teaching for LinkedIn Learning, also on prompt engineering and content engineering. But anyway, I don't throw these terms out to confuse anybody, but to say that there are lots of options, and you don't want to stick with one AI tool. That's basically a mistake for a lot of reasons. But to give you an example from the author's point of view, when I'm writing a book, especially on technology, especially on AI, that is adding features and capabilities every day while I'm trying to write this, you can't be limited to a database that was cut off 6 months ago. Okay, I have to be able to reach out and get other information. Now, there are ways of doing that with internet access, but then you're exposing the manuscript. You don't want that to get out.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there are strategies of getting around that within the system, but you're still going to, the authors are still going to have to step out of it. So no matter what the publisher develops, your authors have no choice but to step out of your tool, or they're going to have too dated material and unuseful material. Basically, it's going to be outdated before they can write it. So the point of the book, Generative AI for Dummies, was to bring up those type of issues for you to think about and how to work around them. You know,
can we look at Wiley for a second? Let's talk about that intersection point. That fascinates me, where you and Wiley found some common ground in the use of AI tools.
We did. The Wiley AI team is superb, let me tell you. And I've worked with a lot of AI teams over the years. And they are very, very good, both in their technical knowledge, but also their creativity in general, and their openness to new ideas. And so we had some of the most outstanding, fabulous brainstorming sessions you could see. But they would ask me specific things, and I would ask them specific things, so we could work it out and make the workflows match, you know, the production level and the author level. So for example, they would ask me, why don't you edit inside the AI tool? Why are you going outside of that to do editing? And I'm like, why would I do it in the AI tool? I mean, you want it, Wiley uses a template like a lot of publishers do, but for the For Dummies books in particular. So I have to come out to that template anyway, because we don't have the AI set up for that. And most of the AI tools don't accept templates very well anyway. You know, so that has to be reworked. But on top of that, there are already tools that are excellent at editing.
Yep.
So why are we reinventing the wheel here? That makes no sense. You know, use AI to automate the processes that you don't already have a great tool for, you know, and work on those. And then they asked me, they said, well, why are you stepping outside of the tool to do research? Why did you want permission? And I was very careful with Wiley to say, I want to use these AI tools. And I explained why. And that was very helpful too, in giving them some groundwork. And then they knew what I was doing. I wasn't, you know, off playing by myself. Anyway, it was a true collaboration. And so they said, why do you want to step out of this to use Perplexity AI, which is a search engine?
Yep.
And I said, well, because I need current data, and your AI's database is cut off. And they said, well, why not use Google? I said, well, I am using Google. And at the time, Google had not fully tied Gemini to Google. They were still working with Bard, which had its own hiccups. Yeah. Okay. So I said, the trick is I have to undo the AI in some search engines to get to the traditional search. And because sometimes AI actually gets in the way of the research.
Yeah,
it helps me to death as an author sometimes. So, but I wanted to use Perplexity AI because that's a search engine that is built from the ground up on AI, so it performs differently.
It does.
Yeah. So by having a toolbox of tools to use, then I could pull together the book you see today. Okay. Now, at no point did I use the AI to actually write the book. I used it on my processes. Okay. I actually wrote the book because we needed the quality to be for dummy standards, you know?
Yes.
So anyway, we went over the entire toolbox, and they would say, well, when you do it this way, it causes a hiccup over here. And then I could either suggest a fix for that hiccup, or they would ask me if there was something I could do on the author's end that would address that hiccup. And that is the beauty of true collaboration.
Yes.
So neither side, I don't want to call it a side, but, you know, author versus production, neither side was hung up on a particular tool or a way of doing things. And so we worked it out. So it worked all the way across the workflow. And it was gorgeous. It really was, you know. And I look for other publishers and pilot projects to work on too, because it's so much left to explore. But
on the production side, do you have a sense of whether they were able to cut time out of the cycle for the production of the physical book?
That was not our goal. Mm-hmm. The assumption is that at some point we will cut the time.
Yeah.
The goal was get the processes right. If we get the processes right and the tool mix right, then the time will cut itself because of the nature and the virtue of AI. So what we're trying to do is produce quality books as quickly as possible. And I want to do that as an author, by the way. You know, I'm a very prolific author. I've got my LinkedIn learning courses, like how to make a knowledge management center using ChatGPT for the IT departments, to teaching power prompting and content engineering. Then I've got the books that I do for Wiley and other publishers. And then my day job, which is journalism, you know, and news breaks every like 15 minutes. It's not like anything sits still in my world. So it's a limit to how much I can produce, even at the speed and that the constant work that I do. I can only get so much squeezed into a day. So I'm interested in, as an author, is how can I produce more work, because that's more income. And the publishers want to produce more work faster. Same reason, more profits. We all understand this. We're all working together. And so speed is ultimately the goal, turn out more work faster, but we don't want to jeopardize quality in the process.
Of course.
So we're focusing on the processes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but we're at 3/4 hour here. I'm looking at the Q&A, and we do have questions. Brian, are you going to take us through the questions?
Yep, I'd be happy to do that. A question early on came from Brittany for Diem. She wanted to know if you could chat more about AI narrated audiobooks and how you're experimenting. She specifically says, I'm curious if you're using tools like 11 Labs or Notebook LM.
We haven't used those officially for our audiobooks, but in the same way that we are encouraging our staff to engage with AI, I know that there are people on my team who have played around with those systems outside, not with our content. And I think at this point, we've only produced a handful of AI narrated audiobooks, but I've heard of other publishers that have actually just really gone into that and done a lot with their backlist there.
I'm one of them. For my new AI book, I was determined to experiment with some of these tools. And so I did the German version with 11 Labs. They can even they can translate and produce the audiobook. But I in that case gave them the ChatGPT translation into German and turned that over to 11 Labs, who produced the book. For the French book, I used, like you do, Zim, Google. And so Google did the French edition. The Spanish edition was also done with 11 Labs. And someone's evaluating that right now. The first sense I'm getting is that there are issues. Of course, there's issues because when you're running through an automated AI system, but there's also ways company like Positron can do quality control. And 11 Labs have announced that they have a system now where they can self-quality control. They can go in and analyze the audio after their system creates the audio and apply their own corrections to what they perceive as the errors in the audio, which is fascinating to me.
Thanks. I was going to ask you if you might want to talk about your experience, but now you've done that. Tim was asking, this I think is also directed at Diem, which version of ChatGPT might you be using? GTP Plus, Team, Enterprise, and makes the annotation that he feels that the IP protections are very different depending on the plan. So
Yeah.
I think we're using them.
We are, I wish our head of technology was here who can answer properly, but we're using GPT 4.0, and I believe it's an enterprise system because the only other users we have on here are all internal.
Thanks. Well, you don't have to be expert at everything.
Yeah.
Well, on that point, Brian, just one thing I'd emphasize, Diem talks about the firewall of sorts that they have. In other words, that the content cannot get outside of the Hopkins process, because of course, one of the big concerns that authors have, perhaps probably even more than publishers, but certainly publishers share the concern, is the idea that their work is getting out there, that it could be cannibalized in some way by these systems. Last month on the editorial webinar, we talked about that specifically. And one of the things I've looked at is for the individuals who don't have an enterprise version of ChatGPT or Claude or working with Google's Gemini, can you get the same kind of protection as an individual? All of the AI tools offer, a little switch that you can turn off. The consensus last month was don't trust them. That that the enterprise versions are secure. I see Pam nodding your head. Talk about that.
Yeah, everything is so new. I mean, a lot of this it's not a matter of being malicious. It's just that everything is so new. And one of the things about AI tools is that they are not secure. And they're working on cybersecurity fixes for that. But so even if the maker of the AI tool tries to keep your data, your input private, it can still leak, either the AI itself leak it to somebody else, or it can be stored and used to train another AI tool by mistake, or it can be hacked. So for those reasons, now when we were working on generative AI for dummies, the way I got around that is partly using different tools and different pieces. We talk about chunk writing, or even in the researching specific points, and these, so it spreads out amongst many tools, and there's not a unified piece to be stolen that way.
That's an interesting approach. That's how break it up, and then no one can steal the whole work. But I think it's important that you're putting up a caution flag. And I think our audience needs to understand that they're exercise caution.
Yeah, and it's not that the people making the AI tools are, like I said, they're not being malicious. They're not after you. It's just so new. It's hard to lock it down.
Makes sense. Brian.
Kathy asked a question that was at least initially addressed to Pam, but perhaps everybody has a perspective on it. Can you address the issue of scalability?
Scalability is a huge problem. I mean, as far as the number of users you can have on the system, it scales that way. If you're talking about scaling outputs to a variety of collaborators, like maybe Barbara's got multiple authors and having multiple authors working on it. So my question would be about the question: are you talking about how many users you can put on an AI tool at once, how many authors you can put on at once, or the back production work, or are you talking about collaborating within the tool? Do we know? But scaling, you got to remember that Gen AI is a generator, is generating outputs that you end up using elsewhere. So you're going to have to find most of your scalability in another program. Yeah.
I just wanted to add something to that. So in terms of like the alt text that we're doing, our technology team then is, I'm pretty sure they are using generative AI to help them with the coding, but they're obviously on the side developing something so that we have the text, we have the images, they can feed it through and then give us an output. So again, it's one of those things where it's like there's the AI systems that we can all use, but it's not a cohesive, like it's not a software we're all going to buy and we have the same thing. That's, you know, that's the sort of interesting piece about it.
And you're absolutely right. If you fine tune it or retrain it, that will go a long ways in helping it. But otherwise, you're still feeding material in as a custom instruction or a RAG data supplement, or attaching a file to the prompt, or however you're approaching that. That's not very scalable. You know, that's still a one job at a time thing, unless you rebuild, retrain, or fine tune a model to do specifically that on specifically that data.
And Kathy was kind enough to add. Sorry, you go first then.
Barbara, I noticed you unmuted, so you've got something to share there.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to say from our side, it's still a very bespoke process. We haven't been able to. I see Kathy saying volume of material, for example, publications. We haven't been able to sort of multiply or cut down 5 days to 4. But I think we're also still in the very early days. So I think that could still, we could still see a lot of changes in scalability.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is that we're seeing more of a focus from the AI tool builders on adding features and capabilities, more so than adding more intelligence, if that makes sense. And so I'm interested to see how they address that problem, because it is universal beyond publishing with other efforts in other industries. And so the demand for a fix for that is very, very strong at the moment. So maybe
Brittany's asking a question, I think directed at you, Pam, but again, other folks may have a perspective on it. Can you give some examples of other tools like Perplexity that you talked about using outside the process, and maybe say a few more words about why go outside and why use those tools?
Okay. Well, Perplexity, like I said, is a search engine. Now, the manufacturer would argue that they want to call it a research engine, but search engine, research engine, I think we're just splitting hairs here. But since it's built from the ground up on AI, it's really, really good at data discovery. That's the two advantages to Gen AI in general, is data discovery and the natural language user interface. Okay, those are the two main strengths. So by using a search engine built from the ground up on Gen AI, I can discover a lot of data faster than I can through a traditional search engine. However, traditional search engines still have a place in our world, and a very important one, so I use those as well. Now, as far as using other AI tools, it depends on what I'm doing. For example, I might prompt ChatGPT and Claude, and maybe even Copilot, the exact same prompt. And I will get different responses from each of them. And then I may pull pieces from each of those responses and put them together and then edit and polish the piece. That is called output stitching, okay? So that gives me a much higher quality piece than using just one AI tool. And you may have noticed, if you work with one AI tool, that it tends to, it has patterns of its own. It tends to repeat itself, use repetitive phrasing and words. They're working on, ironing that out. But the point is, you can get caught in a little bit of a loop, sometimes in its reasoning and in its expression and its outputs. And by stepping out and using multiple AIs, you get around that. You get more perspectives. I might use one tool to give me perspectives from 3 different roles, and another tool to give me a definition, and another tool to fact check the first tool. And you got to be careful with that, because you might have the same models under 2 different tools, and you think you're fact checking one AI tool with another, when you're actually just asking the same model to check itself, you know.
Yeah.
So there are lots of different reasons to step out and use multiple tools. And if you look, you're going to see the industry is already moving in that trend. Perplexity AI, for example, is not using one AI model under it to run it, but several. If you look at the aggregators like the Poe app or Mag AI, you can pay one subscription fee. I think the last time I looked at Poe, it was like $19 a month. And you have a choice of all these AI models as an author for that one price. Or I could go pay ChatGPT $20 a month to use ChatGPT Plus, and then maybe go over to Dream Machine if I'm making a video and pay $40 a month, or I could just pay Poe one. Now there are usage limits, of course, but it depends on what project I'm working in. I can come out better that way. But what you're going to see in the AI industry is nobody sticking with one model. Okay, and there's a good reason for that.
If I could, one of the things we'll be looking at next year is there's a bifurcation between sort of general purpose tools and what the scholarly community is using. There's a whole tool set that I've uncovered that the scholarly side, and I know you mentioned it in your book as well, some tools that are dedicated to that community. And what's been surprising to me is they do have a more general applicability. Their research tools are extraordinary, but a lot of them are focused on academic databases rather than general search. So I think one of the things we'll want to explore next year is adding some of those tools to your toolbox.
Yeah, and what's happening in those situations is you're using AI as the backbone, and you're building an application or adding an application that is good at a specific task. So it's not a pure play of AI. It is a blended tool between AI and some other software. Okay. And so, and I think you're going to see more of that too, where AI moves to be the backbone underlying almost every software application we use, as opposed to a tool we use just to do things. And that would answer the scalability problem that we were just talking about as well. You know.
Other questions?
Jeremy's asking Diem to describe the largest hurdle to using Google text-to-speech to produce an audiobook. If you're able to talk about that.
I think the fact that we've only produced a couple speaks to the fact that we haven't incorporated it into our regular workflow. And so it does go back to that scalability sort of question of, great, we can do this, but now now we're still in the process of trying to figure out what is good enough. What sort of quality control do we need to do with it? You know, we're also realizing, especially again, as a group that's so focused on the print, that we can read all these words. We actually didn't know how to say them. So there are a lot of sort of things like that coming up with the audio. And then, you know, as I mentioned before, they already discontinued my favorite voice. So there's an element of some of these changes are happening outside of our control. And so we think we have a final product, but it's still malleable.
We're at the hour, aren't we, Brian?
We are, but maybe just one last question for everybody, because it's has anyone used AI to help edit audiobooks or audio files? So people are shaking their head no.
Positron is the one that people should look at. Pozotron is an interesting AI-enabled automated tool in that direction.
Great. Well, Thad, thank you for putting this together as ever, and for moderating this series throughout both the spring and the fall. We have one more session coming up next month before we take a little bit of a break and then retool to plan for 2025. But we certainly learned a lot today about thinking about how to approach this, whether off the shelf or existing systems.
Thanks to our speakers for joining us. Very much appreciate your willingness to rehearse and to join us for the session. So many thanks for that. Here again is the slide showing our presenting co-sponsors. We've got a dozen of those, all of whom we've encouraged to share with their membership and invite them to our events so that we can bring in as large an audience as possible. Thanks to BISG and to Brooke and to Brian and to Liz for all of their work in making this possible.
Great. See you soon.
And
Thank you.
I guess that's it. We've okay, thanks to everyone.
Yeah.